And now, your feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled streaming review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rorabeck. Alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchen.
Oh, sorry, Matt. I was just listening to a true crime podcast, and
What is this, 2012?
it felt like
Yeah.
it while we were watching Only Murders in the Building. That's for sure.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, if you guys haven't listened or watched one of our streaming reviews before, today we are reviewing Only Murders in the Building, the first 3 episodes, which are the 3 episodes that are available to you right now on Hulu in the United States and Star Plus internationally if you have Disney Star Plus on your Disney Plus. I know it's confusing, but if you have Star Plus on your Disney Plus, you have access to Only Murders in the Building. Or if you're in the United States, it's on Hulu. Easy as that. Eric and I watched the first 3 episodes today. We will be reviewing those. We won't be putting a score on them or anything. We're just going to be chatting about how we kind of felt about those 3 episodes. If we suggest that you watch it, if we are going to continue watching it, and then maybe on the main podcast, the Untitled Movie Podcast, which you guys should go subscribe to either right here on YouTube or podcast services. Our 101st episode with Kyle Marchen is up right now. You guys can listen to. We might talk about it on a weekly basis over on that show. But for today, we are reviewing the first 3 episodes. Eric, take it away. What is Only Murders in the Building?
Yeah, so as we were talking about, it's a fairly quaint, if dated premise where true crime podcasts and murder mysteries have been popular for almost 10 years now. Whether they
And I guess they still are.
Yeah, they still are, but I mean, they've kind of run a course where I think the novelty of presenting them both in podcast form and on Netflix or streaming services have kind of run its course a little bit, or become sort of mainstream to the point where it's just saturated the market.
Yeah.
And so this kind of almost feels dated, and maybe that's part of the charm of this. But essentially what you have is a trio of characters played by Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez, all of which are characters that are very avid true crime, murder mystery sort of individuals, podcasters, fans. They start their own podcast once there is a murder in their building, and sort of in each episode of the 3 that we watched, we get a little behind the scenes of each one. Steve Martin's character is this over the hill TV actor who used to be on a show in the 90s called Brazos. And it kind of almost feels more like, I mean, he references even in this little kind of like fake clip from his show in the second episode, like Kojak and things like that. But there's a scene where like he's using, floss from what looks like 2004, 2005.
Eric had a weird problem with the floss.
I did, continuity wise. It just felt like it was a little bit after its time, so to speak. But it's basically like Beretta, if you remember that show with Robert Blake. Less problematic because Steve Martin's character is not a wife killer. And then you have Martin Short, who's this in-debt theater director, and sort of seeing his backstory of trying to get financing to pay off some outstanding apartment fees. Then Selena Gomez, who is kind of the linchpin of the 3, and kind of also the mystery, or the mysterious one, who is kind of also a Hardy Boys fan and is also intrigued by this murder that kind of unravels, or begins as a suicide and slowly ravels into a potential murder. And the 3 of them bond over this experience in a way, and there's some sight gags. Overall, it's kind of hit or miss in terms of its tone. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think when it's at its best, it's just you have these 2 pros in Martin Short and Steve Martin just kind of bantering back and forth. And again, I think there are some very charming, delightful, kind of easy moments to kind of enjoy and laugh with instead of laughing at. But tonally speaking, it just kind of feels a little bit awkward because it's combining both melancholy and mystery, and it doesn't always kind of mesh together.
And I think it's unfortunate that it comes off of the heels of The White Lotus, which I actually quite liked, which is doing kind of a similar satirical kind of take on we don't know if it's a murder right away in that show, but the mystery, the who done it, the why is this person dead now, or who killed this person kind of thing. And I feel like Mike White's The White Lotus on HBO, which all takes place at a 5-star kind of resort in the Hawaiian Islands. I mean, it took me a little while to warm up to that show as well. So I'm kind of looking at that, seeing the whole picture, where in this we're seeing only the first 3 episodes. And it did take me like, 3-4 episodes of The White Lotus to kind of warm up to its tone. But I feel like I feel a similar way how I felt at the beginning of that, but even kind of less so, where I told you off the bat when we were watching it, I'm like, I'm just not the biggest Steve Martin and Martin Short fan. And I mean, I'm indifferent over Selena Gomez, and I think she's maybe, one of the she's a I don't know, her acting
I think she's
chops.
miscast
Yeah.
in this.
Yeah, a little bit. And then Martin Short and Steve Martin just feel weirdly. I know it's co-created, I think, by Steve
Yeah.
Martin, right? But like they just feel weirdly out of place. And you mentioned sight gags, and like it's tonally a little bit awkward in moments where it is trying to take this murder mystery, seriously. But it's more about these characters and their kind of what they've been through and why they are so obsessed with this stuff of trying to distract themselves over what's going on in their own lives and things like that.
And living
Or
in this
especially with
fictitious New York apartment, the Arconia, which
kind of an affluent,
yeah,
kind of,
and it's
yeah,
based on the Arsonia, which is again, it as you mentioned, affluent, sort of elitist type kind of
yeah.
home or apartment building, and you kind of look at it and think like, okay, these are the kind of people you'd expect to be living there, of the baby boomer generation, and kind of hanging
Who've been
on.
there for 30 years because they got it when it was much cheaper in New York,
Yeah,
and there's all that kind of New York stuff. And I think some of the actually character actors that they have living in this building, I think are quite good. Like I'm like, yeah, I've met that person, or I've seen that person when I'm in New York. They've kind of nailed all that kind of
or
stuff.
you've seen that actor before, like Jackie Hoffman
Sure.
is one of the
Yeah.
tenants who was in Shiva Baby earlier this
Yes.
year,
Yes.
and things like that. And like it's a roster of character actors and theater actors that you've probably seen on TV or in films before, and they're usually that guy or that girl that you've seen
Yeah.
tons and
Which
tons
is
of times.
perfect for a murder mystery like this, right? You need eccentric characters with great character actors that all can kind of have a motive of why they would do this and things like that. Some of the humor I did actually kind of laugh at, which like I then turned to you as we were watching, and I was like, okay, maybe I was too harsh. I like Steve Martin. I just don't like Martin Short at all. I've never liked Martin Short.
That's interesting
But
because
Steve Martin,
Like I actually do like Martin Short, but I don't think like Martin Short when I think of great comedic actors. He's not
sure.
necessarily the first kind of go-to guy.
He's always bothered me, dude, and I don't know
Interesting.
why. Like I've just never liked Martin Short, and I don't know if that goes back to the Santa Claus 3 when I was a
Did you
younger
ever
boy.
watch the
Um
Father of the Bride movies with him and Steve Martin when he plays the wedding
I
planner?
believe so, but like does like again, don't care about either guy. So I feel like I watched them when I was younger, but like when did they come out?
So they were the early
And then
90s.
right. So yeah, that was of our time, and
And that's when
I
Martin
probably
was
did
most
watch them, but
popular, right? Like
yeah,
it does feel like I mean Martin Short, with Jiminy Glick and things like that, has kind of been
sure.
in the consciousness for a little bit
Never did
longer. But
anything for me.
no, I agree. I'm not the biggest fan of that character, but I liked him on SCTV, and I think that like Joe Dante's Inner Space is a lot of fun, and he's actually
Yeah.
very good when he's kind of going full out slapstick in his performance. And I've always thought that the best Steve Martin is the Steve Martin who's kind of bordering on sort of being a jerk. I think that's why
Yeah.
he works best in something like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles or Dirty Rotten
I totally
Scoundrels.
agree. Yeah.
When he does stuff like LA Story, which I still like,
Or The Jerk.
or The Jerk, yeah. Although he's not really a jerk in The
I know,
Jerk.
I know, I
He's
know.
more absent-minded and aloof.
I know, I
But
know.
with LA Story, when he wrote that as well, he tends to go on a whimsical kind of side where like the world is opening up or sending him signals and signs in ways that are
Mhm.
directly to him, and that kind of feels a little bit new agey at times, or that can be dated. And I feel that there's a little bit of that in here with some of the special effects where like it's
Yeah.
almost like a yo-yo thing where they talk about like,
It's like
when
a
something goes,
trampoline trick kind of
yeah,
thing, a bouncing back kind of thing,
when something
right?
goes down, it comes up again,
Yeah.
and it has a way of being cyclical, and maybe that's a way of representing even, Short and Martin's careers over the years, because I even feel that there's maybe a spicy McDonald's nugget of truth
We
in
did try those
we
today.
did
That review will probably be on the main show,
yeah
but they're pretty good.
in Martin in Steve Martin's sort of monologue that he has about being alone and not being able to work well with others and being awkward, because yeah, he was a star on SNL and is a very accomplished banjo player and did well, but at the same time, like someone like Charles Grodin, he never really found like that filmmaker that really knew how to use him properly,
Right.
or he just never became a star, even though he did well. And like, I mean, having watched, you recently rewatched Little Shop of Horrors, like that's another
Mhm.
role where
Where he's great.
he's amazing in it, because he's so smug and again abusive and nasty, and I almost feel that that works better than him kind of being the ho hum kind of straight man kind of role that he's
But there
normally
is a little bit
saddled
of
with.
that in this as well,
Yeah.
right? Like he plays this, yeah, this actor, this aging actor who doesn't work much anymore. And like he's kind of known around the building for being kind of that, right? Like where he not just keeps to himself, but is a little off-putting to other people. And I think I agree with you that he is best when he is like that. And I feel like there are some moments in this from him, and it's that really dry sense of humor or their little sight gags that he'll like kind of do, or just things like that actually did make me laugh quite a bit. But I actually I do agree with you with the whimsical stuff too, and kind of when the show gets a little too stylized, it just kind of does not work at all. The ongoing mystery of the show of who killed this man in the building, like 3 episodes in now, they give you more than I even thought right away, and then but then they kind of, in episode 2 kind of explain moments that tried to just, trick you by going, oh, these two characters don't know each other or whatever, and then they give you like a line of dialogue that kind of is ridiculous, and it's just a kind of, so you see the writing there when it comes to like a mystery show, and I think like you really have to be careful and you have to plot it out really, or else you'll kind of see those cracks and see how they're just trying to trick you as an audience, and then it doesn't feel believable or satisfying, because you go, oh well, oh, sure, those two characters, why they didn't acknowledge each other in that. Well, it was because of this, but that's a little ridiculous, but we need to write that in there, or else you'll go, why didn't they acknowledge each other over here? And the only reason we didn't want so you wouldn't know by episode 2 that this twist was coming. And I'm like, that's the kind of stuff that just bothered me. And then ultimately by the end of episode 3, and even where they end on that, is I think a punchline, or just like kind of a joke, or just a gag. But like, and maybe the show is ultimately just going to be about, maybe the guy ends up, he's just committed suicide. That's almost my theory, and it's really going to be about maybe the three of them just, finding, their inner things and getting over their past, and kind of moving on, and or needing this thing to, become friends with all one another and find other people, because they were all kind of loners in different ways, or something like that. That's ultimately what I think the show will be about, is that the group of those three, of Martin, Short, and, well, sorry, Martin, Short, and Gomez. um and I don't know, like I'm mixed on it. Like I thought it was perfectly fine. I just think that I'm not really interested in the mystery of where it's going. Like I'm not like, oh shit, I need to know. Whereby in White Lotus, I kind of started to see that stuff, and I'm like, the characters were interesting and eccentric enough, and then I kind of started to see what Mike White was doing with some of the, social commentary he was making, having this taking place at a resort, and using the people of Hawaii and the people who work at this resort, and kind of targeting them by these kind of, rich white people that are just assholes to everyone. And I don't know if this show is doing that as well, but too early to tell. But it doesn't really, I'm not really interested to see where it's ultimately headed. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, they mention certain things where it comes to, like what are white men afraid of, societal change and
Yeah.
colon cancer, but it's not all that biting or satirical. And again, like the concept of this feels dated because it's not necessarily like a parody movie of, or a parody series of, these movies and TV shows and podcasts that have come before. Like you're obviously
No, it
thinking like,
starts with the episode as a podcast
yeah,
kind of title thing, and it kind of, yeah,
and you're thinking like something like Serial, which kind of ran its course almost like
exactly.
8 years ago or
That's what
something
I
like
mean, and
that
that's what I
now.
thought of the
Or Making
most
a
is like this
Murderer,
should
right,
have,
on Netflix.
yeah, which are both, over 3 to 5 years old
Yeah,
each.
and then
Like,
with like kind of the new crop of the whodunit films, and thinking of like thinking about it
and shows and stuff,
yesterday,
yeah.
and shows as well. Like you mentioned, The White Lotus being popular, obviously Knives Out,
Mayor of Easttown,
Mayor of Easttown,
even,
and
right?
that's the thing. Mayor of Easttown found a way to hook you at the end of each episode to bring you back into the
Hmm.
following one, where this doesn't. This kind of is
No.
almost more anecdotal in a weird way, in terms of it's like, it's a comedic punchline, but it's never enough to entice you to watch more, even though your curiosity will kill the cat, so to speak, in how maybe you'll just want to watch it through if you're a completist. But watching it, you're kind of thinking to yourself like, it's an easy watch. It's a very passive watch.
Hmm.
But at the same time, there's something about it that, like, again, feels like it is mimicking, even with The Hateful Eight, which I think was the real film that kind of kicked off all these new whodunit films. Because Knives Out, I think, is getting a lot of credit, but The Hateful Eight came out before that, and I almost feel that Tarantino kind of sparked that a little bit more, and sort of reinvigorating that genre of filmmaking. And so you're seeing a lot of that, and we're going to be seeing even more of it in the next few years. And this one just kind of feels and looks a little flat. I think the cinematography is
Hmm.
too clean and cheap looking.
Weird commercial breaks that shouldn't be
Yeah,
there.
it's almost as if this was meant for, FX or Fox, and then, when they decided to move it to Hulu and Disney Plus Star in Canada and other parts of the world.
I will say that I think there is an ad version of Hulu, but Eric and I, obviously, we don't live in the United States, so we're not completely comfortable with what Hulu offers. But even then, that still feels kind of weird with the like
Yeah,
giant
like
commercial
it's like,
breaks.
why do you need to have those breaks? Unless they're thinking of like maybe syndication rights or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
It just it's a little odd, because again, if you don't have the commercial breaks, I mean, it's not even like Tubi, where like if you're watching something on Tubi, like 30 minutes into the film or show you're watching, there will be almost like a YouTube commercial break, depending on how popular the film or show you're
Yeah.
watching. So like I understand that. I mean, Tubi is a free streaming service, so that's how they make their
And
money
sometimes
back.
it's harder to time where a commercial break should be, so why not include it if you know it's going to be on services that will have that? But that just took me out of it a little bit as well, but I agree with you on the filmmaking side of things, like everything from the cinematography to the music to the, lighting, just it made everything kind of feel a little flat. I totally agree.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some good uh, filmmakers behind this, with Jamie Babbitt and Gillian Robespierre, who directed Obvious Child, who directs the third episode, which we watched.
Right.
Um, but it just kind of feels, again, dated and a little bit predictable. And I think that the character moments help, but it hinges so much more on the character moments, that when you get back to the murder mystery stuff, which ultimately doesn't matter, but to your point, the way that they pace it out, it kind of feels like they could have gotten over all of it in the first episode. And ultimately what
Hmm.
it is a story about lonely people coming together and kind of bonding over their shared, hobby and
Obsession.
obsession,
Yeah.
and sort of turning it into something more. And I like the idea of,
And creating something out of something where there might not be
and
anything.
that's
That's where I ultimately think it's going to
and
go.
that's the most fascinating part, that I think you brought up really in an interesting way, because there's a couple other movies this year that have done that, where I remember earlier with the Mads Mikkelsen film Riders of Justice, where sometimes characters want or are looking for things to be there and they aren't, and it's almost like you're
Mhm.
projecting onto,
Yeah.
a scenario because you need it to be
You
there.
need it more than it is actually there. And
Yeah.
that's what I ultimately think. And that's what we talk about, why each episode isn't ending on some, like, it almost is in a satirical sense, ending on one of those cliffhangers that's supposed to go, here's a new suspect or here's a new piece of the mystery. But each time it almost seems so focused on, either one of the three main characters and what they're projecting, that it doesn't feel like it's an actual lead, right? Like, especially at the end of, the third episode, I feel like there is something that is more of a gag or a bit rather than an actual piece of the mystery, that it is exactly what you're saying, Eric. And what I was saying earlier is, like, it really feels like, yes, it is about these three characters, their loneliness, them trying to obsess over something because they're distracting themselves from their own problems. And I mean, maybe one of the characters is more involved directly, but we don't have all that bit. And we'll get little pieces. I think the mystery will be about their lives, and they've given you tidbits of what's going on in their lives or what happened in their lives, which led them to this point. And I think that might disappoint people ultimately. I don't know. Like, I feel like if the mystery is like, no, it was what they said right at the beginning, but they just kind of projected this because they needed it more than it actually kind of where the clues and evidence was. But
But in a way, that's
I
what a
don't
true
know.
podcast kind of is,
Yeah.
because like unless it has been solved and the mystery is still ongoing, a lot of them end on sort of an anticlimax
On
where
we don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's almost like the build up and sort of the initial kind of setting is the most intriguing part of listening or getting involved, on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, depending on when, they release new episodes. But then when it has to come to a conclusion, sometimes that conclusion isn't satisfying, whether or not you're trying to figure out the story as it's forming, or it just doesn't have an ending. And maybe
Mhm.
that again is a commentary on, endings in general, where, life is not as satisfying as the world that, you create in your own mind, or the play that you create in your own mind, the way that you see, Martin Short and Steve Martin vicariously living, in their heyday, and always talking
Mhm.
about, the good
Brazos
old.
and Splash are funny
Yeah,
though.
yeah, Splash the
Yeah.
musical, which again is like, it does have this sort of like
Spider-Man Turn
Spider-Man
Off the
in, yeah,
Dark.
Turn Off the Dark kind of thing. I almost feel like it is a jab at that, or like anything that Julie Taymor, directed on Broadway. Especially when it gets into like this kind of like dark kind of part of like, people getting hurt because they've added a pool to the stage. But there are some good moments, and I actually do like both Short and
Yeah.
Martin. I just think that like it's a fairly breezy watch, and it's not necessarily that, addictive or intriguing to kind of get involved in that mystery, get entangled in the world, where, you mentioned the Mayor of Easttown, or even True Detective on
And White
HBO, and
Lotus,
White
I'll say
Lotus.
that
Yeah,
too.
and those shows manage to hook you, and yeah, it's manipulative, and that it's doing it on, intentionally, but it earns those moments, and it makes you excited to watch each and every week, where this kind of
Mhm.
is like, okay, like I had some fun.
Maybe I'll let it pile up a couple weeks and maybe I'll watch 2 or 3 of them again, but,
Yeah, and
like, I don't
revisit
know if
it
I.
down the line.
Yeah.
And it's weird because again, even though it doesn't look great, it does, and it takes place during the winter. It does almost weirdly feel more like an autumn show. Just
Mhm.
with kind of, again, like that kind of color palette that it has, and
Right. Everyone wearing nice coats and scarves and stuff
yeah.
like that, but yeah.
But then again,
No,
they're
I
the
agree with
theater
that.
world and actors and people like that as
It's
well.
true.
So, they're just gonna wear that anyways.
I do think that this is a show where, if all of the episodes were out, because they're only, half an hour each, that I probably would have just powered through and watched it. Even I know I'm contradicting myself a little bit by saying, like, I'm not that interested in where it's going, where they leave us. But I feel like if I had access to all of them, I'd be like, okay, I'll get through this now and I'll just see where this goes. Where I think it's actually to its detriment to be a weekly show, because I feel like I'm exactly with you, where I'm kind of just like, I don't know if I am really excited for next Tuesday when a new episode comes out. And
Yeah, it's not like the Marvel stuff where like each and every week when you get a new episode. I mean, with where we are now, what if, we're getting episode 4 as we're recording this tomorrow.
yeah,
And so with that feels more like appointment viewing, where I almost feel the Netflix strategy of dumping it all at once on their site would actually maybe benefit a show like that. But
this show,
it is
yeah,
also an easier watch, like to spend half an hour or an hour kind of just
every week. Like it's
indulging in
not
it. It
that,
doesn't
yeah.
demand too much of you, and it does, like, if you've ever been to New York, it does make you long to go back. It is a very much a travelogue in a weird way of just the sights, the sounds in the city. And if you love New York, you'll I guess get maybe a bit of a kick out of that as well.
Yeah, or if you are a huge true crime person, like I feel like maybe if and you're still into that kind of stuff. Like I feel like there are people like Eric and I who maybe like you probably listen to Serial. I like that was probably the tail end of my, you know, true crime,
Well, Making a Murderer
podcast
was that
or
was the big
yeah.
one on
And I never even watched
Netflix.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it
Um
does feel just 5 or 6 years too late, and like, almost like Steve Martin,
my sister still loves that stuff. So I feel like she
I don't
she and it's all she listens to, right?
I
Like and I know what's that podcast, the huge one that she listens to with the two women that talk about murders?
good question. I think it's one of those subgenres that will never go out of style, and it'll always be of interest.
My Favorite Murder.
My
Got
Favorite
it. I
Murder. But
didn't have to
I
look it
mean, you
up.
even look at like Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. I mean, when that book
Sure.
came out, that captivated the world, and that was a
Oh,
very
people have been
specific
I mean,
murder
yeah.
story, right? Like the idea is that, people love to escape their own reality, and no matter how grim it is, they like to put on the detective hat and say like, okay, this is how I would solve it, or put the pieces together. And it's like a puzzle.
Oh yeah, everyone, yeah.
You're always trying to figure out, it is your version of the story, or is your version of the narrative the right version.
Were you a Hardy Boy guy when you were younger too? I
Not I
was a
No,
little bit.
I mean, I liked Sherlock. I liked
Matt and Jeff Hardy, baby, WWE. That's what I'm
Sherlock
talking
Holmes
about.
was the
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes.
Holmes was
Sure.
always kind of the, like, whether it was Jeremy Brett or Christopher Lee, and then obviously Benedict Cumberbatch as well, or just the classic Sir Arthur Conan Doyle stuff. But yeah, I think it's intriguing, and if when it's done well, as you mentioned, those other shows, those are the ones that
Oh,
will
it's great.
have you
They're
coming
a
back for
blast.
more.
Like a great murder mystery movie or show is a blast if done really well. So I understand. I agree with you with the podcast stuff. Like, yeah, I know there are people who still are obsessed with this stuff, and ultimately maybe we're just in our own little world, not realizing that it's still gigantic. So this show probably still makes sense to kind of capitalize on all of that. But right now I'm kind of mixed on it. There are some funny moments, some fun performances. I'm not really intrigued by the overall mystery, but I kind of see where I think the show is going with focusing on those three characters. But I think I'll let this one pile up a little bit and then maybe watch the rest of them. But I'm not in like a super, like I'm not in a rush. Like we're leading into TIFF right now, and I just like I don't have the time. And I don't know. Maybe it'll be a nice little like, oh, I need a breather from all the heavy TIFF stuff that I'll throw this on for 35 minutes. But I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on it. So I'm like, if you have, I mean, you have Disney Plus, and if you're in Canada and have Star Plus, or Hulu, like it's not the worst thing in the world. But it's, I think those other shows we talked about, like Mayor of Easttown and White Lotus, that kind of have similar themes and are a similar subject kind of thing.
Or that
I would
first
just
season
go,
of True Detective. Like, I feel like
which
that
is
is like the
perfect.
standard
Yeah.
for, the long form murder mystery narrative that is also very much character driven, and that kind of also deserves more credit for kicking off an interest
Mhm.
in or a renewed interest in the
Totally
subgenre.
agree. And I think personally, if you're looking something that's a little bit more like this, that is a little satirical, well, the other show I'm talking about more, White Lotus, but like it has some comedic elements with some eccentric characters that are very funny and some great actors. Like White Lotus is
Or
spectacular, so
Twin
go check
Peaks.
that out. But yeah, I know that's true too.
Which is,
Um,
I mean, that was the whole, but that was truly, that first season of Twin Peaks was truly focused on who killed Laura Palmer, right? Like that was
mhm.
the mystery of that show, even though it's not a true crime story. It definitely kind of captivated, a wide audience that had to tune in
Mhm.
each and every week. Where I agree with
Absolutely, yeah.
you that this is a show that I would maybe wait until it's, completely finished and available on Disney Plus Star, and then I would kind of maybe binge watch it and finish it in one go, because again, it's very easy to digest and just enjoy for what it is, a Sunday afternoon watch. That's what
Oh,
it
it never
is.
felt like a slog or
No.
anything. So like I definitely think like I mildly enjoyed it. It's just I'm not super invested in it. So um take that with a grain of salt, I guess. Like we're not true crime guys, and I feel like I'm not a Martin Short or Steve Martin guy, but I think that trio of them are good. It didn't do much for me. So, you guys can check out the first 3 episodes now. Then there'll be episodes weekly, both on Hulu and Star Plus, like we mentioned. We're not going to put a rating on it because it is incomplete, which is what we do with our streaming kind of reviews. But thank you all for listening. We have and watching. We have many other reviews that we would love for you guys to check out. Shang-Chi comes out this week, so you guys can check out our Shang-Chi review from last week. Eric, what else do we got going on?
Well, we'll have a
Um,
review for Worth, which is the 9/11 drama with Michael Keaton and Stanley Tucci.
on Netflix, yeah.
Yes, on Netflix.
If it's Disney Star Plus and Hulu, Vacation Friends is out right now. We have a we have a review for that. Candyman, The Night House, Paw Patrol, What If, Vivo, Annette, Free Guy, The Suicide Squad. So we got lots of
And you
reviews that you
mentioned
guys can
TIFF,
check out.
and we should plug
Yeah,
that quickly, that we will have uh, quite a few reviews as the festival begins. We've actually already seen a movie that will be a fun film, I think, to talk about. And we will
absolutely. Yeah.
keep it spoiler free because we realize a lot of stuff that we're seeing will be for the first time, and we want to make sure
Mhm.
that people, enjoy their first experience with the film. But I think, this TIFF is going to be very exciting with some of the stuff we'll have reviews up for.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, we'll have TIFF coverage from September 9th to the 19th, probably before then, probably after then. So you guys can get all that stuff right here on YouTube or on podcast services at Untitled Movie Reviews. You can subscribe to our other show, Untitled Movie Podcast, on podcast services, and Untitled Movie Conversations. So just search those, or you can find them all over on our Letterbox HQ, which is Untitled_movies. All of our links to all of our socials. We post all of our video reviews there. You get the podcast links, everything, our ratings, all that jazz is over on Letterbox. So that's probably your best bet over there. As always, my name is Matt Rorabeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at untitledmoviepodcast.com. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rorabeck.
And I'm Eric Marchen. You can find more of my video reviews at rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Don't stand so close to me.